Before we get started, let me clarify a few things about what this course is and what it isn't so you have the right expectations. First is that our focus will be on building a real-world application and not to explore all features of Angular or ASP.NET Core, because each application, depending on its requirements, often needs a subset of features in any given frameworks. So it's impossible for me to talk about all the features of, let's say, ASP.NET Core or any framework core and how they are different from their previous versions. That's not the scope of this course and requires a separate course. In this course, I'm assuming you're familiar with Angular 2 and the previous versions of ASP.NET and Entity Framework, that is ASP.NET MVC 5 and Entity Framework 6, and want to quickly get up to speed with .NET Core in a hands-on and pragmatic way. So our focus here is on building a real-world application using the latest technologies. Now, this app, even though it's a real-world application, it's not a complete and sophisticated app with a fancy user interface like those popular web apps out there. These apps, especially those with complex features and fancy user interfaces, are built by a team of developers working together for several months or longer. Also, in such teams, there are other practices like continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated testing, and so on. So it's not something that I, as one person, can demonstrate within 7 to 10 hours. And even if I extend the scope of this course to 50 or 100 hours, it's not going to be useful because both you and I will lose momentum and get lost in detail along the way. So from a teaching point of view, this is not going to be effective. Instead, we're going to build an application with a few basic functions mostly centered around CRUD operations. So you're going to learn how to build forms with Angular that talk to backend APIs built with ASP.NET Core. And to make the application more interesting, I've included a few complex use cases based on the students' feedback, like cascading drop-down lists and dynamically rendered checkboxes and so on. Also, we're going to look at filtering, sorting, and paging data. We're going to look at handling and login errors, displaying toast notifications, but note that this is not real-time notifications coming from the server, just a toast notification. We're also going to look at authentication and authorization with multiple roles having different permissions. We're going to look at preventing CSRF security attacks. We're going to look at uploading photos with progress bars, displaying charts, dialog boxes, and so on. Depending on your level of experience, you may find this the right level for you, or you may think this is too easy. So I'm explaining this to make sure you're at the right level for this course. If you're looking for an application with a complex domain and want to learn about domain-driven design or design patterns, continuous integration, automated testing, this course is not what you're looking for. Having said that, you're welcome to extend this application and add new complex features, but that's not within the scope of this course. Also, this application is going to have a very simple user interface, so our focus is not on something that is visually outstanding. That's the job of a UI designer, not a programmer. If you're good at designing user interfaces, it's a bonus. It helps you stand out from the rest of the crowd, but it's not something that is expected from you. And one last thing about the 60-day challenge program. As the title of this program says, this is all about challenging you and helping you take your coding skills to the next level. So as you're building these features, you may get stuck, you may get compile time or runtime errors, or certain things may not work on your machine. You're welcome to use the discussion board to post your questions, but you cannot expect me or others to help you solve these issues. That's your job as a developer. Because in the real world, when you are part of a team, every single day you will encounter tens of issues like that. There, you don't have me or other students in the course to help you. So you need to do your own research and find a solution. And the first thing you need to do is to jump on Google and type the error message or the problem. I can guarantee that in more than 90% of the cases, you can find your answer on the first page of Google. And guess what? That's exactly what I do when I encounter issues. So if you're going to post your question and expect me to help you, chances are I may not know the reason why you're having a problem on your machine because I don't know everything. Yes, in this course, I'm your instructor, but outside this, I'm a student myself. So when you ask me something that I don't know, I have to jump on Google and do research on your behalf. And this will prevent you from growing. If you want to take your coding skills to the next level, if you want to get a better job with better pay, you have to earn it. And yes, it's not easy. It takes time. Sometimes you have to stay up till 3 a.m. in the morning. Nobody said it's easy. But if you're passionate, if you're determined, you can earn it. You can be a senior developer with a good job, with a good pay. And that's the whole purpose of this 60-day challenge program, to push you out of your comfort zone. Okay, now that you know exactly what this course is and what it isn't, let's take a look at the prerequisites in more detail. In order to take this course, you should have at least 3 months experience with Angular 2, ASP.NET MVC 5, and Entity Framework 6. But you don't need any prior knowledge of ASP.NET Core or Entity Framework Core. I'm going to introduce you to these frameworks in a pragmatic way along the way. So, more specifically, when it comes to Angular 2, you should know your components, services, modules, dependency injection, property and event binding, forms, and routing. When it comes to ASP.NET MVC, you should know your controllers, actions, model binding, HTTP verbs like get, post, put, and delete. And finally, when it comes to Entity Framework, you should know your code-first migrations, link, and DB context. So if there are areas that you are not quite familiar with, I highly recommend you to watch my related courses on Udemy. That includes Angular 2 with TypeScript for beginners, the complete ASP.NET MVC 5 course, and Entity Framework 6 in depth. Alright, enough introduction. Now let's take a look at the requirements for the application we're going to build. So we're going to build a web application for an imaginary vehicle dealer called Viga. Let's say you want to sell your car. You call Viga, talk to someone on the phone, and ask them to register your car in their database. Other people who are buyers can browse the vehicles in their database, and if they're interested in a vehicle, they will call Viga and talk to someone on the phone, and the rest of the process happens offline at that stage. So this is the big picture. Now, as part of recording a vehicle for sale, we need to know its make, its model, its features. So basically there are a sort of standard features like ABS brakes, airbags, bottle holders, and so on. So here we have a many-to-many relationship between vehicles and features. A vehicle can have many features, and a feature may be available in many different vehicles. We also need to record whether a vehicle is registered or not, the owner's name and contact information, and finally, we should also be able to upload one or more photos for each vehicle. So the simplest solution to this problem is to have a page where we see all the vehicles in the database. On this page, we should be able to filter and sort vehicles. If there are more than 10 vehicles, we should display them in pages. And from this page, we should be able to click a vehicle to see its details. We should also have a page to add a new vehicle to the database. Also, in terms of authorization, we need two different roles here. One is the moderator role, and this includes Viga personnel who talk to sellers and buyers on the phone. They can create, update, and delete vehicles in the database. We also need an admin role, and anyone in this role has additional privileges. For this imaginary app, we're going to display a report of vehicle sales by their makes in a pie chart like this. So anyone with admin access can view this report. And finally, if someone hasn't logged in, they should only be able to browse the vehicles. So we're going to hide the buttons for creating, updating, and deleting vehicles here. Okay, now that you know what we're going to build, let's start setting up our development environment. Alright, to set up your development environment, first you need to head over to microsoft.com/net/core. On this page, you can see the installation instructions for your operating system. So if you're a Windows user, the simplest way is to install Visual Studio 2017. And this will bring all the components you need. So you don't need to do anything else. But in this course, I'm not going to use Visual Studio. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, which is a very lightweight and fast editor. It's not a full IDE like Visual Studio, but it's a very powerful cross-platform code editor. So whether you're using Windows, Linux, or Mac, you can use Visual Studio Code, which we call VS Code. Now, what I want you to do is, in this course for the next few hours, forget about Visual Studio and let's build this application using VS Code. I know that you might be used to using Visual Studio, but trust me, VS Code is much better. In fact, I personally have not used Visual Studio for over a year. So, if you're on Windows on this page, go to Command Line. You need to download and install .NET Core SDK. And then, to get Visual Studio Code, simply head over to code.visualstudio.com. Now, back to this page. If you're a Linux or a Mac user, once again, you can go to this page. And on this page, you can see the instructions for installing .NET Core on your version of Linux. The instructions are very easy. You simply copy-paste a few commands in terminal and download .NET SDK. And once again, you head over to code.visualstudio.com to get VS Code. Once you install VS Code, you need to add a few extensions so you can write C# code in it. So, first we need to go to the command palette. On Mac, the shortcut is Shift, Command, and P. On Windows, is Shift, Control, P. So here's the command palette. Type install ext, short for extension. And now if you scroll down, you can see this command here, install extensions. Here you can see the extensions that I have installed. So I've got this Angular v2 TypeScript snippets, and with this, we can easily create an Angular component or a service by using a code snippet. And I'm going to show you how this works later in the course. So to install this extension or any other extensions, simply type its name here, like Angular v2. And now you can see all the extensions available in VS Code Gallery. In front of each extension, you see this install button. So simply install it, and then you need to reload VS Code for the extension to take effect. Now let's go back and see what other extensions I have installed here. I've got another extension, ASP.NET Helper, which makes it easier to develop ASP.NET MVC applications. I've got auto import, which is extremely powerful. When you're writing TypeScript code, you have to constantly go on top of the file and add import statements. With this extension, you can automatically import the classes you have used in the current module. Again, I'm going to show you how this works later in the course. I also have Beautify, which is for formatting JavaScript and HTML code. It's not really essential, but it's a nice thing to have. Now, C# and C# extensions are the two essential plugins that you need to install. It will give you syntax highlighting, code completion, and so on. I also have Docker here, but this is not necessary. It just gives you syntax highlighting when you are working with Docker files. Here's another extension which is optional, MS SQL. So with this, you can connect to a SQL Server database, look at your tables, write queries, and so on. And finally, here's another extension, REST client. Again, this is optional. With this, you can call RESTful endpoints. Now, these are the extensions that I have been using, but there are hundreds or thousands of extensions available in VS Code Gallery. So feel free to go and explore them on your own. And now finally, we need to install a couple of node packages. One is Yeoman, which is a web scaffolding tool. for modern web applications. So in Visual Studio, when you create a new project, you automatically get a bunch of folders and files that come from a template. VS Code doesn't have this feature, so we need to use Yeoman to generate a template for our new project. So npm install -g yo. Now yo is just an engine. We can install templates on top of this engine. So the template we're going to use for an ASP.NET Core and Angular 2 application is called generator-ASP.NET Core-SPA. So let's quickly recap. If you want to use Visual Studio, you need to install Visual Studio 2017. Otherwise, if you don't want to use Visual Studio, which is the approach I'm going to take, first you need to install .NET Core SDK. Then you need to install VS Code as your editor. You add the extensions that I told you about. And finally, you install Yo and generator-ASP.NET Core-SPA. Now, on top of all these, you also need SQL Server. When you install Visual Studio 2017, it automatically comes with a lightweight version of SQL Server, which is called SQL Express. If you're using a Mac or Linux, you don't have Visual Studio 2017. So you need to install SQL Server using a Docker image. And that's what I'm going to show you in the next lecture. Okay, in order to install SQL Server on Mac OS or Linux, we need to use a tool called Docker, which basically automates and simplifies the deployment of applications. And it solves the issue that your application works on your machine, but when you deploy it to a different machine, it doesn't work. With Docker, we package our application along with all its dependencies and configuration settings into an image. And then we can deploy this image to a different machine with only one command. This command will load our application with all its dependencies into what we call a container. Now, SQL Server for Linux comes as a Docker image, which means the software along with all its dependencies are packaged inside this image. And we're going to use this image to install it on our machine. So, if you haven't installed Docker, simply head over to docker.com. On Docker website, go to this page, Get Docker. And here you can find downloads for Windows, Mac OS, and different distributions of Linux. Now, after you install Docker, the first thing you need to do is to configure the memory allocation. So, here's the Docker icon. Click. You can see Docker is running. Sometimes you may run into issues. You can simply restart it here. Now let's go to Preferences. On this page, in the Advanced tab, look, here I've set the memory to 4 gigabytes. By default, it's 2 gigabytes, so you need to increase it to 4 gigabytes in order to run SQL Server image. Once you do that, it's going to take a few seconds until Docker is restarted. Now in Terminal, let's make sure Docker is running. So simply type Docker. Beautiful. Now we need to pull the SQL Server image from Docker registry. So sudo docker pull Microsoft/MS-SQL-server-Linux. With this, we download the SQL Server image into our machine. Alright, now we want to run this image inside the container. So sudo docker run. We need to set an environment variable -e accept _EULA, which stands for End User License Agreement. We set this to Y. And note that I have put this environment variable inside single quotes. Next, we need to set another environment variable. So -e. This one is SA password. And here we need to use a complex password. If you use a weak password, you're going to get a runtime exception. And I'm going to talk about that later in this video. So, to make sure that you will have a smooth experience as you're going through this course, use the password that I'm going to use in this video. My with capital M, complex with capital C, password with capital P, exclamation mark 234, and close the single quote. Next, we need to map a port in our container to a port in our host machine. So -P for the port, 1433 to 1433. So we're mapping the port 1433 in our container to this port on our host machine. And we're going to use this port when connecting to SQL Server from our web application. Now, if you're using Linux, you can also map a volume in the container to a volume on your host machine. And this will allow you to persist your database between container executions. So if you restart your container, if you restart your machine, your database is going to stay there. Unfortunately, at the time of recording this video, this feature is not supported on Mac. However, if you're on Linux, you add -v for mapping the volume. First, you add the volume on the host machine, like user, my, database, that's the folder, that's the path, colon to map, and then you add /var, /opt, /msSQL. Once again, this doesn't work on Mac, so I'm going to remove it. Next, we add -d to run this as a background service. And finally, we need to add the name of our image. That's the image we downloaded earlier. So Microsoft/MSSQL-server-Linux. Okay, beautiful. SQL Server is running. Now here, unlike Windows, we don't have SQL Server Management Studio. So if you want to connect to your database, there are two ways. If you're on Linux, head over to this link on the screen, bit.ly/SQL Server Tools. This is a page on Microsoft website, and here you can see the instructions for installing SQL Server command line tools for various distributions of Linux. But if you're on a Mac, you can use SQL Pro, which is similar to SQL Server Management Studio. So simply head over to mac.sqlclient.com, and by the way, this is a commercial application. There is a trial version, which is I think about 30 days, and then you need to get a license, but that's reasonably cheap. It's only about 100 Australian dollars, which is about perhaps 70 US dollars. Once you run SQL Pro, you can go to Connect. On this window, go to New. Here we add the server name, which is localhost. For authentication, we're going to use SQL Server Authentication with SA as the username, and password is going to be my complex password !234. Save. Beautiful. This shows that our server is online. So we connect to the server. Now currently we don't have any databases here. But later in the course, when we create our database, we can come back here, look at our tables, look at our data, run queries, and so on. Now, what if something goes wrong while you're running this SQL Server image? Let me show you how to troubleshoot this problem. So I have opened another terminal window. I want to show you the Docker containers that are currently running. So Docker PS. You can see I have one container. This is the ID of my container. This is the image that this container is based on, which is Microsoft SQL Server Linux. Now I'm going to stop this container. So Docker, stop, and then I need to add the container ID. We can only use the first 3 or 4 letters. So E8CF. Now, one of the issues that you may run into is that you run the SQL Server image, but it automatically terminates. So when you run Docker PS, you don't see anything. And then you can run Docker PS-A to see all the previous containers. And here you can see I had this container that terminated 29 seconds ago. So that's one of the issues you may run into. So when you use the SQL Pro or SQL Server command line tools, the server is not running. Then you come to the terminal, you run Docker PS, and the container is not there. What happened? So let's simulate a scenario where you run into an issue. So I'm going to run the Docker again, but this time I'm going to use a weak password. So sudo docker run -e accept _eula, set it to y. Another environment variable, SA password. I'm going to set it to 1234. Map the port, run it as a daemon, and here's the image name, Server Linux. Nothing happened here. We just got a container ID. So Docker PS, and the container is not there. It terminated automatically. So we need to find the log for this container and then copy it somewhere in our host machine. So let me go to the desktop here, create a folder, log. Now I need the ID for the last container. So once again, Docker PS-A, which is short for all. Okay, so here's the last container ID. b35f. So now docker cp, short for copy, b35f colon, and our log is inside this path in the container, /var/opt/msql/log/error log. That's the name of the file. Now we want to copy this to the current folder. Now you can see here in this folder we have this error log file. We can open this with VS Code or any other editors. So code period. And here's our log. So if you scroll to the bottom of this log, you can see this error here. Password validation failed. The password does not meet SQL Server password policy requirements. And that's the reason we couldn't start this container. Alright, our environment is set up. Next, we're going to create our ASP.NET Core project. Okay, now let's create a new project. So I'm going to create a new folder here, Vega. Go inside this folder, and then use Yeoman to generate a project. So Yo, and then we add the name of our template, which is ASP.NET Core-SPA. So all Yeoman templates, their npm package start with generator dash, but the actual template name doesn't have generator dash. Alright, so this is Yeoman, and the version of my ASP.NET Core template is 0.8.7. The first question here is the type of framework you want to use on the client side. You've got Angular, Aurelia, Knockout, React, React with Redux, and Vue. So I'm going to use Angular. The next question is about the type of project we want to use. So previously, before the final release of Visual Studio 2017, Microsoft introduced a new project type, which is a JSON file called project.json. They were working on this as a replacement for CSproj files, because CSproj was very complicated, very heavy, whereas this project.json is very clean, very lightweight, and consistent with other frameworks. However, in the final release of Visual Studio 2017, Microsoft decided to drop project.json and go back to those CSproj files. So this project.json is only here for legacy reason, and all the future projects will be based on CSproj. So let's select this one here. Next question is about unit tests. Do you want to include them? Not at this stage. Now the project name, which is the same name as the folder. Okay, Yeoman created a bunch of files and folders here, and now it's going to npm to download and install all the node modules here. Okay, our project is ready. Now let's run it. There are two ways to run this project. One way is here in the terminal. So from the project folder, we execute .NET run. So this will build our application and then launch a web server at this address, localhost port 5000. So when we navigate to this address, this is what we get. It's a very basic web application using Angular 2 on the client and ASP.NET Core on the server. In the nav bar, we have three pages here: home, counter, and fetch data. This page shows an example of an API built with ASP.NET Core and an Angular component that consumes that API. So all this data you see in this table are coming from the server. Now we're not going to work with these pages, we're going to delete them, we're going to build an application from scratch. Now there is a second way to run our application. So here in the terminal, I want to stop this process. So we press Ctrl and C. Now I'm going to open this in VS Code. So code period. And this will open our Visual Studio Code pointing at the current folder. Now chances are this may not work on your machine. Let me show you how to fix this problem. So just open up VS Code manually. Go to the command palette. So Shift, Command and P on Mac or Shift, Control P on Windows. And search for command. The first item is install code command in path. So when you execute this, then you need to restart your terminal window, and then the path will be effective. So you can go to any folder and type code period. Now the second way to run our application is from inside VS Code. So if you don't want to switch back and forth between the terminal, you can do it here. So press Ctrl and backtick, which is the key before number 1 on your keyboard. So here inside VS Code, we have our terminal. And once again, we can run .NET run here. Next, we're going to look at the files and folders in this project.